just accidentally pressed that we're going live, but so we'll just sit there for 3 minutes. So don't cuss or pick your nose.
Or this clock could be slow.
I'm going from the computer.
Oh,
stand.
okay.
Somebody should say something to do with face masks. See if we get blocked.
YouTube's blocking out.
A doctor from Stanford University, they were having a discussion with the meeting that said that I don't think young children are right. They should develop or you should be smart. There's no evidence that does any good.
You mean wearing a mask?
He's spoken against
Bless you.
accepted the consensus of the scientific. Well, of course, that's a consensus.
Chief Deputy, how are you?
Everybody that disagrees is everybody that disagrees isn't allowed to speak. Well, then the consensus, you have a consensus.
Funny how that works, huh?
You know, under communism, you only had a consensus.
Yeah.
You are. I just remember
Thinking for a
watching
second.
communism as a kid and all the words they talked about and then FBI and now we live in it.
You know, close enough, Mr.
Willingly.
Chairman. Like,
All right.
Willingly, yes. Take me. Look at the freedoms that people.
Well, we were just having a conversation.
Got a big hammer here. It's 9:30. 25 seconds. Let's call the pay plan subcommittee to order at 9:30, March 7th, or April 9th, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the wrong sheet here. All members are present. I'd entertain a motion to adopt the agenda as published.
So moved.
Moved by Jeff, second by Gary to adopt the agenda. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. Agenda is adopted. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the March 5th subcommittee meeting. Moved by Doak, second by Gary. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. Motion carried. Public comment. Anyone here for public comment? Seeing none, we will move on to the agenda, item 5. Before we start, I had received information from some regarding this meeting and some suggestions of what might be on the agenda, and also some of the items that we talked about at the last meeting that may need some clarification. So that's kind of how the agenda was put together. So starting with 5A, the pay plan structure now, I would just wonder if, Scott, if you could just tell the committee where exactly we are now or how the pay plan is set up.
Certainly. As for the pay plan, how it's structured now, and you've received in the past a memo or at least the county board, I believe, has received a memo as to the methodology of how the pay plan was originally constructed and how we had taken a number of counties within the area, as well as 4 other counties that are similar in size and adjacent to populous counties, and how we took those wage scales and put them together, took out the high and low, put in an average. That was step 1. And then from that point on, did the 1.5 steps for the first half, 1% for the second half. And so that's how the wage scales had come in, and that how we also then on an annual basis determine what will be the increase in employee wages and salaries. Is that for those that are within the step plan, depending on where they are, they would get the step increase of either 1.5% or 1%. And then there would also be the cost of living, which for 2021 was 1.65%. Those that are at the top of the scale or beyond would only receive the cost of living, which is 1.65. So I'll call it the three increases, depending on where you are with regards to the pay plan, was 1.65, 2.15, or 2.65. So that's kind of how the pay structure is right now. And last but not least is, well, I can put into the farther down is how the COLA is determined, Mr. Chair. So I guess I could touch base on that part later if you would like.
Sure.
I mean, that's up to you. Are there any questions as to the methodology as to how the plan is created or was created?
I think go ahead, Doug.
Okay, maybe you're going to ask the same question, but last time there was a question about whether or not the COLA was always included, or there was maybe some confusion about that, but can you clarify that? Is the
Sure.
COLA always included?
That there has been some confusion, and I understand partially why. Is they're part of how we look at it and how the media will report things regarding employee wages is that there are always two parts. There is the step increase depending on where you are in the pay plan and the cost of living. Many, I won't say all, but many local governments, whether they're school districts, cities, villages, counties, there's usually a pay plan. A lot of your union contracts have the same thing where there are step increases when you go from year to year to year, that there'll be an increase for that year, but that is just the step increase. And there's also a cost of living increase that is on top of that. What usually happens is how the media will report such a thing is that, and I'm just going to pick Manitowoc County because it's the first county that came to my head. You would see in the press that Manitowoc County employees are receiving a 2% increase in wages. Well, that's not completely true because the cost of living that was approved was 2%. But does not take into account any step increases that are part of the step plan. That's also very similar to when we have union contracts and those are reported, whether that's sheriff's deputies or teachers. It would say sheriff's deputies are receiving a 2.5% increase. And that's true from a cost of living standpoint, but within their contracts, there are also step increases. And you'll see that in information that was provided to you regarding the different employees and where those step increases are. So perfect example is for the union contract is you would see roughly a 2% increase in step when you go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to step 4, which is the top of the scale. But then also depending on the year, you could receive a 2.2, a 2.25, or a 3%. And again, this is very common in governmental pay plans. I'm not trying to make any judgments. I'm just telling you what is usual within government pay plans.
When the plan is first adopted and then since modified, I know when we got the pay plan, it was on this big document with all the job titles and the steps going through, and the county board approved that pay plan per the schedule that was submitted. But to continue on that, as far as the policy, is there documentation that shows what the policy is, showing the steps and then the cost of living written into that so that everyone understands what the actual policy is? Or do they just have the document that shows the steps?
More often than not, I believe they have the document that shows the steps. There is within the personnel policy in Chapter 4, there are policies that deal with the pay plan policy, as well as being able to modify the wage scale of specific positions and reclassify specific positions. So, but it does not say in the policy what the specific step increase is. Instead, it just talks about the plan itself and how those plans are put together and how they are then brought forth before the executive committee for approval, and then eventually the county board. In that same respect, the pay plan would not, or it would not show in the policy that also with the pay plan that from the cost of living, that the pay plan from year to year is indexed to that cost of living. In other words, if you were to start at $20 an hour and there is and I'm going to make up the percentage because I'm going to try to do my math correct. If there was a 5% cost of living increase, then, in fact, I should do it as 0.5%, then the new starting wage for that same position the next year would be $20.10, because when you index the pay plan, what that helps to do is make sure that you are making those wages stay in line with what inflation or the cost of living is. Because if you did not do that, let's say after 5 years, the starting salary would still be $20, but that is no longer what it was originally thought, because that was $20 5 years ago. If you're going to go from the rate of inflation, it should be $20 plus 5 years of inflation, if I'm making sense. And Paul, in case I screw anything up, you are always allowed to come in and speak truth.
So any more questions on where we are right now on the plan? Just before we go any further, personally, to me, I think that this subject is more, we're trying to make it more complicated than it really is, I think. So keeping that in perspective when we move forward. Okay, the next item is determining the annual wage or salary increases. And I think you might have already covered that under A.
Yeah, and in fact, what I would do as well is just for the first part of the memo that I had just distributed this morning is I will apologize to this committee and to the board in the respect that what we had done in the past regarding the determining of annual wage and salary increases, we had put together, administration had put together the pay plan. And so that pay plan was therefore distributed to executive committee, usually on an annual basis, but didn't necessarily give a good explanation each year as to how this came about, why the increase is the way it is. And part of the reason why is the assumption on my part that executive committee members and county board members understood the history and the methodology behind it. And so what I'd like to do in the future is to help provide more information and education to county board supervisors as to how we determine cost of living or salary increases. And so by doing that, what I would want to do then is on an annual basis, provide the memo that summarizes the methodology of the pay plan's creation and structure. Also identify, because when we were talking about the pay increases for 2021 in last year's budget process, there was county board supervisors did not know, were not aware, and again, my fault, how many employees were on the front half of the pay plan, how many were on the second half of the pay plan, and how many were at the top of the scale and therefore would only receive the cost of living. And so I think that might have influenced county board members as to when we're talking about step increases and the like. There may have been some misunderstanding thinking that a majority of employees were receiving both step increases and cost of living increases, which more than likely is not the case. So we would be providing that information to county board supervisors. I would also then provide the information to county board supervisors that's in the personnel policy that talks about the process of employees asking for additional compensation or additional steps or wanting their position or wage scale to be modified. And then last but not least, what I'd like to do then is provide kind of some trend report that gives kind of 5 years of data that shows how different percentages and dollar amounts compare year to year. If we think of the cost of living in 1 year as opposed to the next year, 1.65% may be considered a lot, but in comparison to the year after year after year, it may be considered that 1.65 is within the sweet spot or that it's low. Again, I am not making any recommendations in that respect. What it would be is I would provide that information to the county board and the executive committee, and then from there, that would help to provide additional information as to why in the administrator's budget, certain things are recommended from employee pay and benefits as to percentage increases.
Any questions for Scott on that item? Seems pretty self-explanatory. Okay, now to the interesting one. Let's go on to the cost of living issue. And I know I've got it broken down into 3 subjects here, but we might be able to address all 3 at the same time, Scott?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. Regarding the cost of living or COLA, and COLA, for those of you who wonder where does the A come in, it's cost of living adjustment. So that's how you get the A for COLA. But our methodology for determining the cost of living adjustment or COLA is that the state of Wisconsin has the Wisconsin Employment Relations Commission, or WERC. And the WERC has staff on hand that calculate and project cost of living or COLA percentages, and they do this almost on a monthly basis.
You want to see it on screen?
Sure. I need to probably go to that one. You see? Nope. There we go.
There.
Okay. Oh,
Uh-oh.
I was right the first time. Sorry. Give me a sec. There we go.
So this
So, go
goes
ahead,
all the way
Paul.
back to, this goes back to 2009. But they project those. So if we look at what we have available at budget time is the December 1st number. So 1.65 is right here, and they calculate monthly since then. And this is used for, again, this is the Wisconsin Employment Relations Commission. This is for Wisconsin labor contracts and wage increases in general. So it's tailored for this. And it also comes from the Department of Revenue, which looks at the CPI indexes.
And our methodology is that we take, it's the December number, correct, Paul?
Yes.
So
because that's
what
what's
we
available.
do is we don't cherry pick which month, because as you see, there's variations from month to month. So what we do as a methodology to remain impartial is we pick the December month prior to the next year. So that 1.65 comes out to be December of 2020, and that's how we determine. Now, you may wonder, how the heck do you know the December number when we approve the budget in November? The reason why, because as you can see here, they project out months ahead. So when we do ours by the September budget, we do have the December number. So that is the number that we use in determining the cost of living increase. And so that's the methodology we use. And I know there's some difficulty because there's a variety of calculations. There are some unions that will use the Midwest CPI, and pick your alphabet soup as to which numbers and letters that come together. We tried as close as we can to be Wisconsin specific. The WERC is the best methodology and calculation that we've been able to find. and it does go from a state standpoint. It is extremely difficult. In fact, I would say almost impossible unless you wanted to pay an exorbitant amount of money for an economist, a labor economist and the like, to be able to calculate specifically cost of living just for Kewaunee County, especially since we are part of the Green Bay metropolitan area, and there's a whole bunch of other items that would make that calculation very difficult. This is probably the most reliable calculation that we would have.
Any questions on that specific item, Bob?
Bob, you need to press the button that looks like a person talking. Bob? You need to press the button that looks like a person talking.
It's on.
Oh, press the mic down near the bottom. Nope.
Or the screen, maybe he's not.
That's it. Right here. Yeah. Yep. No.
That gets pulled out.
Okay. I thought you were cutting me off, Scott.
No way, Mr. Chair.
You can do it at any time, halfway through. But if you look at the chart here and you start with September 2020 and look at September 2021, that's a year period. There's almost 100% difference in the cost of living. I find that questionable how within a 12-month period it can go from 1.09 to 1.96. That tells me there are some variations within a year that we're not aware of. We're not really aware of how they come up with these numbers. And I've asked this for years. There's a lot of things that go into it. And that, I guess I would question whether this is the best source for our cost of living. And Paul, would you have any idea why it would change that much within a 12-month period?
It goes up and down every month. And if you look at the national ones, if you look at the national month-by-month calculations, it does the exact same thing. So prices go up and prices go down. They plug that into their formula and spit this out. No, I can't. Yes. Think of gas. Gas goes up and down throughout the year. So pandemic hits, it goes down to $1 a gallon. You know, we're all done, it goes back up. That is one piece of a bigger formula, but gasoline
I can
is a good
see
example
all
of it.
these factors that go into it do change throughout the year, but like housing does not change 80% during a year. Gasoline usually doesn't change that much during a year.
And I'll say housing is probably an exception as well, because
Insurance and
the market value of houses is, you know, I sold my last house for a lot more than I ever would have paid for it. And it goes up and down depending on what's happening outside the housing market as well. So it can swing quite a bit. And again, one item shouldn't have a big impact on it. It's their set of items. So how much is gas? That's one part of the formula. How much are groceries going up and down in general? And again, they may do it on a national level and they break it down to regional. I don't know that the federal agency or has the Wisconsin ones, but these two state agencies take that and through some formula apply it to Wisconsin and labor contracts in particular. But the first question of why does it go up and down? Because prices in general go up and down. And gas is a perfect example of it. It's market driven. So if it costs you 10 cents more for a gallon than it did last week, well, the consumer price index looking at gas has gone up. If the price of gas has gone down because either refinery issues, supply issues, or demand issues have gone down, well, then the consumer price index has gone down.
And this is very similar in the respect that I don't know if they still report this. There are times that you'll see the media do a report of what would be called a grocery basket, where they take 10 different grocery items, and therefore with that grocery, they take those same 10 items every single quarter, and they determine whether the price of groceries have gone up or down. From a consumer price index, they have a basket of items, which is not just food, it's a number of different things. And yes, those also go up and down. Probably the most difficult part of what is the concern here is, as Mr. Widener had said, is that if you look from September 1 of 20 to September 1 of 21, you see almost a full percentage increase from one to the other. And the numbers are the numbers. I can't dispute that. The part that I throw in there is that the methodology used is exactly the same. As for how we would then determine a cost of living increase, this is where I go from the impartial standpoint. I am in no way going to presume that I know better as to how to calculate a cost of living increase for Kewaunee County. Instead, I am going to rely on professionals that do this for a living, of which you have communities throughout the state that will be using these numbers. And if they are faulty, then there would definitely be some type of backlash as to the numbers being used. The only other item that I could think for the board is we're picking a specific month, which is the December prior to the new year. What we could do is we could take all 12 months of the prior year, or all the months that they have listed of the prior year, put them together and average them. Again, a very similar type of methodology, but you're still having to rely or have faith in that the calculation and the numbers as to how they put that together is sound. And that's where I have to have faith that how they're putting the numbers together and the methodology that they use is sound.
I think you said it earlier too, Scott. You can cherry pick however you want to cherry pick.
Correct.
You know, the fact that we're consistently using December for our budgetary purposes, that's consistency, and it is what it is. Some years it could be higher than the 12-month average. Some years it could be lower than the 12-month average.
Correct.
And I agree, be consistent. Otherwise, we're all over the place. Pick one and use it.
But it's for the whole year. I think that Bob's point about it changing so dramatically, it should be an average because it's for the whole year. We got to find some way to, and it does blunt a little bit the sharp rise that can happen month to month.
Yes, but it would also blunt the sharp fall.
Yes,
in
but
the long,
it shouldn't be as reactive, I think, because it's for the full 12 months. You're making a decision for a whole year.
in the long run, as long as you're consistent, we're comparing December to December, year after year, or if we do average from year after year, it'll be the same. If you work through the math, it goes up and it goes down. Average or December to December, it's going to come out to be the same. It may not exactly at that point in time, but prices in general are going up. And whether you compare December to December or June to June, that's the trend. They're going up and down. And again, I think consistency is the best. It was mentioned earlier, we're making this more complicated, and okay, maybe this one doesn't show the year to year average or December to December change, but the national statistics do. And as long as you pick one and stick with it, it's going to come out the same.
I question that statement, though, that if you only take a December number and you were to average those over 20 years and you eliminate the 11 months, the rest of the 11 months, which are independently calculated, you get the same average. I don't think you would.
I think you'd probably come pretty close.
Yeah.
But they're independently calculated numbers. You're taking your N number down by a factor of, almost 12.
If you look at the chart, so year one, you're here, year two, you're here. You can have ups and downs throughout. Sure. And at the end of the calculation, no matter how you get there, you're going from here to here, or here, or here. There are going to be little rounding differences, yes, but in the bigger picture, you are still on the line. And again, I'm assuming up because inflation tends to go up. You're going to have this increase. And as long as you're consistent about where you're measuring it, the big picture is going to come out.
I don't buy it.
Just in looking at that chart that's up there, though, if you take 2020 and go from January 1st to December, and you look at those numbers and you average those, you're going to come up with a bigger number than 1.65.
Correct.
Yeah.
For
But that's
year.
not what
For
Paul's
that year.
talking about.
I know.
Paul would be talking about
One
then,
year, you are right.
Right.
If you look
But
at
overall.
yes.
because Paul would be saying then take the average of 19, the average of 20. What is that percentage increase or decrease? how would that then compare to the December of 19 and the December of 20? What would be that percentage increase or decrease? And we're saying more than likely, though we can run the analysis, that those increases or decreases would be similar.
I'm really not questioning this particular chart. I was not aware that it does vary that much within a calendar year, though. I had no idea. I thought it was just minor incremental variations month to month.
And I use the national statistics. I think it's the regional ones. I forget which ones.
Yeah.
But they're published by the national ones there's 2 calculations in solid waste where it's incremented by the consumer price index. And I have the exact same thing there. There they do calculate one for each month, and they go up and they go down. They do calculate a year end of the year in December, and then they calculate the average. So I pick what's available at the time because, again, over the course of time, it's going to work out. So one of them is the admin payments to the town, which I just calculated now to be paid in a few months. And I use the most recent one. As long as we consistently compare, say, May to May, actually in that case it can't be, it'd be February to February, we're going to end up on the same line regardless of which 2 points we pick in the long run. Compared 1 year to 1 year, yes, it will be different.
Yeah, the larger discussion is, are we using the right source for the cost of living? And Rob had submitted to the committee information from a different source. And I questioned that because I don't know if this is a good source or not, so I wanted to look into it further. But it says that Kewaunee County is 17% less than the national average. So I've always wondered if Kewaunee County, how it compares within the state. I'm sure we're lower than Milwaukee and Dane County.
Absolutely.
And probably Brown County.
2 things here. Number 1, cost of living.
Yeah.
This, I'll believe this. It says we're 12% and what was the other one? 17% lower than the national average.
Yeah.
Okay. Cost of living increase is what we're talking here.
Right.
Change from year to year.
Mm-hmm.
So the cost of living is what does your $100,000 house here? What would it cost you in California? It's a lot different. What does a gallon of milk cost you here? What does it cost on the East Coast? A lot different. Their cost of living is higher. So what does it cost? Now the increase from 1 year to the next, a gallon of milk costs you $5 now, it costs you $5.50 next year. Well, that's the increase from year to year. So what we're talking here is the increase from year to year, which could be the same, but not necessarily. You know, inflation absolutely can be different in different parts of the country. That's why they have regional indexes. So if we have an index that's narrowed down to Wisconsin and particular to labor, so it doesn't necessarily include the cost of construction and there's a few other indexes out there, that's the one I would say is the best fit for Wisconsin. We're not going to have an index from the increase from year to year for Kewaunee County versus Milwaukee County versus the rest. The data sample is probably not big enough or not worth looking at, right?
So you could say that the cost of living for Wisconsin is probably, that's an average statewide. So you could say that Kewaunee County is on the lower end, that the cost of living adjustment would probably be less than the 1.65 in December. Milwaukee County would probably be higher.
It's possible.
To equalize.
We can't necessarily say that. I know
Well, but you know what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying, but this is
a
why
Wisconsin average, not
right. And that's why from this standpoint, for the data that we've been able to find, this is the most accurate that we can find that deals with Wisconsin as a whole. There's no other data that goes any farther down than the state. This is used whether it's Florence County, which is 4,500 people, or whether it's Milwaukee County, which is 960,000 people. And you're right, there are certain times, but housing may be more expensive in Dane County and Milwaukee County than what it would be in Kewaunee County,
which is the actual cost of living. Correct.
Correct. So the more important part is really this is, and Paul had talked about this. If you start at a point, whether it is below or above your start, so let's just say that the standpoint is that we are 10% below the average cost of living Fine. You've started at this point where you're 10% below. The most important part isn't where you started. It's what is the increase each year. So if I'm now increasing because the cost of living is 1.5, it doesn't matter that if I started at the average or not, because what we're talking about is the average increase in cost of living. That's the real number that we're looking at, not the dollar amount that we started at. Am I making sense? I'm seeing confusion.
Okay, but to wrap it up, to answer those two questions, if the index existed for Kewaunee County versus Milwaukee, absolutely, we'd take that. It's not out there. I can't calculate that. So the next best or the best available one is a statewide average. It could be very well that the cost of living in Milwaukee goes up 2%, Kewaunee 1%, or vice versa. There's really no way to tell that. So what's the best available? And we believe this is the best available.
One way or another, it really impresses upon me that the 1.65% that we gave this year, particularly in time, but in, period, was very fair.
From a cost of living standpoint, absolutely.
Well, I mean, period. I mean, the idea that this was some kind of a great scandal that we only gave a 1.65% is, according to some of the messages that I've received and comments and things that have been spoken to me, it just further impresses upon me that the board was not unfair. They were not being stingy. They were not cheating people. But anyway, it's a little off subject.
Just a comment on the looking at the state 1.6 versus a national cost of living average. I think you have to take into consideration that you can't compare Kewaunee or Kewaunee County to Los Angeles County or New York City, or because it's expensive to live there. But on the other hand, the people that work in those cities make a hell of a lot more money than are paid in Kewaunee County. So if the cost of living was so high in LA and New York and the wages were very low, there'd be nobody living there. So I think you can't use that number, the national average. I think you got to stick closer to the state average. And then again, is there a way to determine a specific cost of living in Kewaunee County? I don't think there is.
How does also the information you requested, Supervisor Romden, regarding retirement, which is 7.5%, workers' compensation, health insurance, dental insurance, how does all of that factor into it? Because, those percentages change, of course, and the responsibility of the county and the value of those things. That's a little more difficult to determine, but certainly the amounts that we pay per employee, which I don't know if you have that sheet before you, but that also is a factor.
So I think, when you talk about wage increases, you're talking about it theoretically more than a number on a pay scale, 1.5 or 1% plus cost of living. You have to filter in all these other numbers that compromise total compensation. So are we,
which is kind of putting us to letter D. I guess the only thing I'm asking, Mr. Chair, is do we need, I think we've covered C1 and C2. Do we need to cover C3?
I guess I put that on there because I don't know if that's specifically written into our pay plan policy where it's 1.5, 1, and the cost of living. Is that in the document? And is it allowed annually by the board, or is it something that's automatic?
All pay increases have to be approved by the board.
None of it is automatic.
No,
correct.
No,
it shouldn't be. And
it is not.
I think that this is one of the errors that the board has made, and somewhere along the line, it became understood somehow that it's all automatic. And
so
I think that's
guess
why
that
we're
was
having this discussion.
Yeah, that was my point of putting this on the agenda, is that we have the document and the understanding of what the pay plan is now, but it's something that it's not a contract, it's not a guarantee.
It's a guide.
It's a guide. Very good. And that's, I think, where we are and how we have to look at it. I think there was a lot of time spent in putting the pay plan together initially, and it is a good guide. I don't know if you can find a better one, but I think it's a good guide and
It's like any guide. It's a good guide. It is extremely helpful. I think overall it has a lot of value. But like any guide, it's not a law, it's not a rule. It has to be assessed from year to year, whether or not it needs any kind of adjustment or tweaking. And there could be years, where there's something extraordinary, maybe wages would just rise extraordinarily in this area and it would go the other way. So that's hard to see.
To answer your question, Mr. Chair, within the personnel policy, there is no express statement saying that that the pay is the step plus the cost of living. That has just been what I would call the budgetary process that we put forward. And again, part of the reason why is from a policy standpoint and from the memo standpoint, we had always said that here is the methodology and process that we use, but the ultimate authority and decision is first within the executive committee making a recommendation to the county board, but ultimately the county board through the budgetary process decides those items.
Mr. Chair, I think the reason we're here today is because when it came to budget last year, the board felt we couldn't afford to pay both items, correct? So we couldn't pay what's in the pay plan or the cost of living. So we had to make a decision on one or the other, correct?
I think it was not that we could afford to pay
I guess
it.
we couldn't keep going in this direction.
It's what the board felt was a fair wage increase for 2021.
Correct.
And I think that's where we're getting into letter D, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So if I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
When we're talking about
Just before we start,
Sure.
these are a couple of concerns that Doak had talked to me about or emailed to me about of how we determine this, and is there some other way to do it, or so go for it.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So when we're talking about affordability, I think this was probably the kind of the crux of the issue. And again, this is where I will take some responsibility in being able to inform and educate the board as to affordability of total compensation and the like. Again, I want to be very clear that ultimately the decision is made by the county board. So I am in no way trying to indicate that the county administrator's recommendation must be followed or approved. That is not how this process works. But I did want to give a little bit more information as to how administration moves forward in putting a recommendation regarding employee wages and employee compensation. And so you have in front of you this sheet that has a number of different numbers in it. It has net new construction, it has equalized value, it has levy, it has revenue, payroll, which includes both salaries and wages, as well as what I'll call total compensation, or we call it total payroll, which therefore includes benefits. And then you have an item in there, which is the pay plan, which shows the different percentages of increases. Other payroll, which means for those elected officials or those that are part of a union contract, what those percentage increases were, as well as the number of employees, both by full-time equivalents or FTEs, as well as the number of bodies themselves. So I think part of it, and I had explained some of this in the memo that I had given to you, is we had a conversation, a good conversation with Supervisor Baker. And I think that there's some, as a larger standpoint, I believe that there is some concern regarding affordability. And is there a way that we can tie or index annual employee compensation to specific data figures? And while I would love to tell you that, sure, there is, if I'm going to be completely honest, there really is not. And there's a number of different reasons why regarding the moving parts. And so I'll just start with a couple of them to go through. When we talk about net new construction, so if you look at that sheet and we see that net new construction adopted for 2021 was 0.659%, and you see the net new construction for previous years. Net new construction is an indication as to how much the county is allowed to raise their levy and still be within the statutory limit, because we know that state statutes say that counties can raise their levy by the amount of net new construction. So the thought of tying salaries and wages to net new construction sounds like that would work. The problem is we pay our employees by more than just property taxes. We do it by a number of other revenue sources. So to use net new construction is not a good indicator. In that same respect, we look at equalized value. Well, and you look at equalized value there, and you have the total amount, you have the dollar change from year to year, as well as the percentage change. And as you can see, those can vary greatly. You see the box there where it says Dominion. If you remember, shortly after the decommissioning of the plant, the town of Carlton put in an assessed value of the power plant at, I forget, like $400 million. Which caused a large increase in the equalized value. But then what happened is you had the Dominion promptly took the town of Carlton to court, and instead the court agreement was that the equalized value of that property would be $15 million. So you had this large decrease in equalized value. That doesn't even go to the point of equalized value is only a part of, you have equalized value, you have mill rate that determines what your levy is. So again, equalized value is not a good indication as to how to do employee compensation. I'll then go to the levy. Again, with the levy, you see the dollar amounts, you see the percentage change from year to year. Again, that's good, but not all salaries, and human services is a perfect example that you have a large number of revenue that goes to salaries that is not part of the levy. So again, levy is not a good indicator as to how to increase wages and salaries. So then you go to revenue itself, of which this is part of a 5-year financial forecast that we do roughly every 5 years. And you see that you have revenues there that go up from year to year. And again, those revenues can vary from year to year, not only from a property tax standpoint, but a sales tax standpoint. Intergovernmental transfers vary from year to year. Fines and forfeitures, charges for services. So again, the variability of those revenues at times can make that difficult, because again, if we look at revenues, that doesn't necessarily take in, if it could have inaccurate measurements if we have the receipt of a large grant or sale of assets. So again, what we have is variability that doesn't necessarily provide us an accurate indicator on how to index employee salaries to that. Then finally, well, not finally, we go to payroll and we talk about the salaries and wages and the benefits, and you do the dollar amounts. And what is probably a more interesting number for us to pay attention to is not that the dollar change in salaries and wages, but the percentage change in salaries and wages and payroll. But again, that varies. Why? We add staff, we cut staff. We have a large number of retirements where they were at the top of the scale, and we have the replacements going at the bottom of the scale. We have wage reclassifications that could increase salaries. We could have wage scale changes. So again, variability there, which therefore makes it difficult at times to be able to use that as an index. The one part that I look at and that we continue to do is when we look at total budgeted expenditures, and then you look at the percentage of salary and wages compared to the total expenditures, or the total wages and benefits compared to total expenditures. So you look at that number and your eyes get big and you think, oh my God, that's an incredible high amount of percentage. We are in a service business. We do not make widgets. So therefore, we do not have equipment to the degree that a manufacturing does. In that same respect, from a government standpoint, actually the percentages that we're talking about is not outrageous from a county government standpoint. In fact, if you were to look at a city, those percentages would be much, much higher. Why? Because you have fire and police, as well as union contracts and the like. Your employee salary percentage and wage and benefit percentage is going to be much higher in those smaller governments. School districts, the same type of thing. So to me, this is a good thing to look at, but not in a static, not in 1 year. You start to look at it from a range standpoint and try to determine, what's the range going? Are we continuing to go beyond what we need to, or is that staying within a range? As you saw, things were starting to go up, and then in 2021 went down slightly from the total wages standpoint and from the total wages and benefits standpoint. The next part, so again, a nice thing to have, but not something that you can really index, because again, the variability. Pay plan helps to give you an idea as to the increases from year to year to year. And what you're also seeing is that's the cost of living. But what you're not seeing in any of these is what the total percentage increase would be from a wage standpoint, with wages and steps. Well, instead, you're seeing them individually. So what you may see is you have some folks that are getting a 3.15% increase, and I'm making up the number, of our 150 employees, there's only 25 of those employees that are receiving that 3.15. And then for the ones that are making 2.65, there's again another 50 that are making 2.65. And then those that are at the top of the scale, the other 75, they're the ones making 1.65. So the actual total increase in wages and benefits is much lower.
Just a question on that, where we are now, where it says hard limit on 3.75, how do you get that number?
When we modified the pay plan back in 2019, where we, instead of having the 3% and 2% step increases, we reduced them down to 1.5 and 1, and we also established a hard limit as to the maximum that an employee can get in an increase, and that is 3.75. Chairman Widener knows this quite well. Part of the question was, well, what happens if the cost of living goes up to 2.5% or 3%? Is all of a sudden that cost of living going to throw us all out of whack? And so it was determined by the board that there would be a hard limit, that the highest increase that an employee could get from a step and cost of living standpoint would be 3.75%.
Thank you.
The next one, where it says other payroll, WPPA is the Wisconsin Professional Policemen's Association. So that's the sheriff's deputies contract. And as you see, that contract is negotiated roughly every 2 to 3 years. We've typically done a 3-year contract. As you can see, the cost of living increases that were approved by the county board, as well as the steps, and those steps have been in the contract pretty much since I've been here. Those, again, have not been revisited and are usually not revisited. Usually what is negotiated is what's going to be the annual cost of living. And then for the electeds, CCL is clerk of courts, ROD is register of deeds, TRS is treasurer. I'm sorry, county clerk is CCL, I apologize. COC is clerk of courts, and SHF is sheriff. So you see the different annual percentage increases for those elected officials. Those are determined by the executive committee, and those are determined prior to the new term, so prior to an election. So that way, when someone is running for that office, they know exactly what the compensation and the pay will be for that position. And then finally, you have under employees, FTE, and employees themselves. And as you can see, which is again, the variability, if we look back in 2017, we had 146.37 FTEs. And in 2021, we have 145.21. So we have a full 1 FTE less than what we did 5 years ago. And if we go back a year before that, it's probably 147. So we're probably 2 less than that, or at least from 14. So again, those types of things help to give you an idea as to the different things that administration looks at when we talk about affordability. I'll throw one more item out there, which is difficult to kind of understand, but happens every single year.
I have,
Sure.
on the WPPA,
Yes.
so that's sheriff's deputies.
Correct.
That's 3% cost of living,
Yes.
and then 2% steps
Correct.
on top of the 3,
Correct. And there are only 4 steps
5%.
for the first 4 years. Yes.
5% years 1 through 4 of them. So starting to year 4, 5%.
Correct.
What does it go to after that?
Then it just does the cost of living.
3%,
Correct.
which is above.
The 1.65. Yes.
Well, I'm missing something,
That's
but
part of the union negotiation.
who negotiated that contract?
County board.
I thought that the contract wasn't it spread out over 3 years? It wasn't it a 3%? Jason, if you can jump in on that, what,
3%
do you remember what it was?
per year for 3 years?
But that was the increase
No,
in the.
No.
All right.
If you look, so let's do it this way. The simplest way is take the 3%, take the 3%, the 3%, and the 2.25%, because we're currently in a 3-year contract, which includes 19, 20, and 21.
Okay.
So within that, so if I am a new sheriff's deputy,
Right.
I will start at $27. And I believe from the contract, after 6 months, I go to step 2, which is a 2% raise.
6 months.
After 6 months, that's what's in the contract. So, and then after 12 months, another 2% raise. I get my 3% cost of living then. And then then a year passes, I get my 2% step. Year 3 passes, I get my 2%. I am now at the top of the scale. All I receive from that point on is the cost of living. That is currently what is structured. There are other counties that do different contracts.
But the 3% cost of living,
Yes.
that's 3%. When does that kick in? How often?
That kicks in on January 1st.
And goes till?
Goes till December 31st.
And that's the first year of the
Correct.
contract.
Correct.
Now let's stick with that 3%.
Yep.
Second year of the contract. What is the 3? Another 3%?
Yes, sir.
Third year of the contract,
Yes, sir.
another 3%.
Yes.
And this is cumulative. So on top of the
Yes.
3%, that amount, I now get 3% onto that.
Yes.
And then the third year, I get another 3%.
Yes.
And then I get my steps in there too.
Yes.
Okay?
I guess I wasn't under the impression that that's how the police
Who-
contract worked, but
Who was on this? Yeah, not to.
I was on that
Who
committee.
was on this committee?
I was on that committee. But I thought, I thought
For the sheriff's department, it appears it was.
I thought we negotiated the contract with 3-year contract with a certain percent increase in wages and over 3 years. And once you got through that wage contract, if you were at the top of the step and your step didn't cover you anymore, then you got the cost of living increase. But I didn't think the cost of living increase was 3%. I thought it was whatever the cost of living was that year.
Well, I'm seeing 3% unless the administrator is wrong.
I do not believe that I'm wrong, Mr. Chairman, and that
That's what it's been getting paid at, whether that's what you thought or not. That's what they've been paying, and nobody's turned the money back over.
that was what was negotiated, and therefore negotiated and approved. That's what we're contractually obligated to pay.
And this is the final year of that contract.
Correct.
Good night.
We received our letter, and I'm sorry I wasn't there at the personnel committee meeting. We did receive our letter from WPPA that we can start negotiations sometime usually we do it early summer.
Yes, the chair needs to work on appointing a new committee for that.
Because that would have been approved.
I just got
for the
that
2019
notice.
Budget. So this would have been negotiated in 2018.
Yes, usually what we do, and previous to then, we had 16, 17, 18. So I was around for the 16, 17, 18 contract, and I was around for the 18, 19, 20. I'm sorry, the 19, 20, 21 contract, and we will be negotiating a new contract. Again, typically they're either 2 or 3 years. Usually it's the preference of the two negotiating parties, whether to do 2 or 3. You can do 1, you can do 5, you can do whatever you want, as long as both parties agree.
Okay, one more thing, some history there too. So before Act 10, we had other unions. Those contracts contain steps and cost of living as well.
Correct. Human
this is
Services
not
had
unique.
6.
It's not unique to the pay plan. It's not unique to the sheriff's department. It was almost across the board.
I think the other employees should
So-
unionize.
So we have 157 employees. In the budget, it says there's 37 in the sheriff. So that chunk was not affected by the decision for the cost of living of 1.65.
There are some in the respect that any of those that are administrative staff or jailer dispatchers, because they are not part of the union.
Oh, so that's 15 jailer dispatch.
Union has, I think, about 20.
Yeah, about 20
Yeah.
or 21.
So this affects 20 of the 157.
Correct.
Probably, in fact, closer to, about 15, actually, probably about 10%.
Well, it helps me to understand where the other 137 are coming from.
Well, I know we got some concessions, I think on health insurance.
The very first time around,
Retirement.
what we had done is previously to my coming, that yes, what had happened is that WRS, the full amount was paid by the county. The sheriff's deputies paid 10% of health insurance premiums while employees paid 15%. And so for the contract for 16, 17, 18, we stepped it that by the end of the 3rd year in 2018, that all sheriff deputies would be paying the employee portion similar to county employees, and all sheriff's deputies would be paying 15% of their health insurance premium, which was the same as county employees.
What year? I'm sorry, I didn't.
2018 is by when that would come. We stepped it in. So in 16, in fact, let me back up, Mr. Chair. So I'll say county employees and I'll say deputies. So county employees paid 15% of health insurance premiums, and they paid the full, and I'll make it simple, 6.6% of WRS contributions to their retirement. That's what county employees paid. Sheriff's deputies at the time paid 0 towards their WRS, and they paid 10% of health insurance premiums. In 2016, that went up to sheriff's deputies paying 13% and 2.2% in WRS. In 17, they paid 14% and 4.4% of WRS. And then in 18, the final year of the contract, they paid 15% of health insurance premiums, the same as all other county employees, and they paid the full employee share, which is right around 6.6%. They paid the full employee share. So at the end of 18, sheriff's deputies were treated exactly the same as any other county employee from a contract standpoint.
Prior to that, they were not.
Correct. And that was not uncommon in a lot of counties.
And in fairness to the committee that did the negotiations with the union, there are a ton of moving parts in the discussion.
Correct.
And, there's concessions made by all at some point when you finally get to that. So it's not just simply the monetary. And like you said, there's different benefit packages that are changed. There's overtime, there's call-in time, there's so many different things. And that's part of the joy. So
that's the give and take of negotiations. And so what I'm saying is all the things that I'm saying is, I'll say it this way, does not make Kewaunee County unique.
No. Yeah,
Exactly what happened.
Well, I've done enough with the city.
yeah, exactly.
I can tell you went through the struggle.
Mr. Chairman, I know it's otherwise, but I would have your mic on just for the sake of those watching.
I'll turn on, but they made some concessions. We made some concessions. We paid for the concessions that we were able to get. And Scott just went through the contributions that law enforcement agreed to. And it was going to cost us, or else you go to a binding arbitration. So we did fight pretty hard, Dan.
No. Yeah, I've done
We
that.
always fight hard. Yeah.
I've done those negotiations for over 30 years and they're not fun. They're a little easier now because of Act 10, so you don't have as many unions to deal with, but the ones you have to deal with, and like Bob said, it ultimately the final straw would be binding arbitration, and then you're looking at what's the arbitrator gonna look at, your offer or the unions, and who knows where you're gonna go. So if it's not an easy task.
If you don't mind, Mr. Chair, I'm going to
Moving on.
bring us back to affordability.
Yes.
So here's the difficult part. I would not challenge you, but I would encourage you to look at some other county budgets, Waukesha, some of the others. And what will happen at times is if you look at their budgets and they do a forecast, you'll see that here's the budget for 2021 and it is balanced. And then in 2022, there is this deficit. And in 2023, the deficit grows even larger. And in 2024, the deficit grows even larger. And in 2025, it grows even larger. And that is typical in most of your county budgets. But amazingly, and not really amazingly, I say that firmly tongue in cheek, every single year the budget balances. So what happens at times is when we talk about affordability, administration, Mr. Kunish and I look at what our revenues are, we look at what our expenses are, and we look at affordability. And I'll give the perfect example is the pay plan. We could tell from when the pay plan was first structured, after about 2018, we could tell this was no longer sustainable. Could I point to a specific dollar amount and say this is the reason why, or a specific statistic? I could not. But what we could tell is from the increases that we were having, that eventually we would be coming up hard against the amount of money we could raise through taxes and fees and everything else, and what we could pay in salaries. Hence, we came to the county board and said, we need to make an adjustment to the pay plan, which again was done by administration. So when we come forward with our salary recommendations to the board, I can't specifically say to you, we looked at these specific dollars and we are absolutely confident, but we look at affordability and we look at affordability not only for 2021, but then how that would look in 2022 and possibly even 2023. But after that, all bets are off. So we try to basically gauge, and this is more art than science. We basically try to gauge the affordability of the current year that we're budgeting for and a couple years out. Can we give you a definitive analysis? No, we can't, because you don't know what the revenues are going to be next year. You don't specifically know what the expenses are going to be next year. There could be economic factors that make things difficult. And this is where, and please don't take this the wrong way, this is where there has to be a certain amount of faith and trust that administration is looking at that and therefore doing what is in the best interest of the county, both in the current term and the long term. That does not, and I want to be very clear, that does not mean that the board should therefore abdicate its responsibility regarding county budgeting. The only part that I'm trying to put forth is that administration does look at these things, and we do look at the affordability, and therefore, if we're putting forth something, we do believe it is affordable over the short term.
But two things to add. One, it's come up this meeting and the last meeting about the pay plan being somehow almost a guarantee. And I'm not sure where that's from. It's never been a guarantee. It's been the plan. It's been, here's what we're going to pay, in the same thought process that the capital improvement plan, you put capital items on there. Here's what we would like to see. Here's what we're planning to do. But everything on both of those has to come down to the budget process each year. So neither one of those are guaranteed. Things change all along the way, and it should be reacted to, and the executive committee gets to look at that before the budget process is completed. And number two, I think the original discussion point somewhere on the agenda here was asking for an index to tie it to. And the statement was, well, we don't have an index. I just want to clarify that we're not just throwing up our hands saying, sorry, it's complicated. We don't have a single index, but we have, here's a page full of items and several measurements in here. I won't call them indexes, they're measurements saying, here's where it was historically, here's where you are, and trying to tie that back out. So yes, we think it's affordable, and here's some indicators why. That part was missing from previous budget cycles. So I think this will become part of the, at least to the executive committee saying, okay, cost of living increase is coming up. Here's what's in the budget, and here's why we think it's affordable. Ideally, yeah, it'd be nice to have one number that could tie that out, but short of that, we can give more information, several measurements to do almost as good a job as one index could.
We talk all of the time, though, about what other counties are doing. I think another question that should somehow be considered, taken into consideration, is what is the private sector doing? I mean, what is the average employee? What is the average employee at Widener Lumber going to be getting for an increase, this coming year? And
It's 8.
What percent are they going up at the coho, even after Masteler was in there thinking that the tip jar was the money tree? But we learned at the last meeting. But I would think that those would be important questions as well, because the private sector are the ones that are going to be paying these salaries.
And I don't disagree with what you're saying, Mr. Chairman, but there is some difficulty in that as well. In that, I'm going to guess if you were in the restaurant and hospitality industry, that 2020 was a tough year. Yet in the construction industry, it was not as much of a tough year. If you talk to Supervisor Massler and his business, he's had his best year ever. So the difficulty there, and I'm not disagreeing, the difficulty is how do you put that together? Because as we look at this, depending on how you want to do this, you can pick a specific industry and therefore say we should be giving 5% increases plus the cost of living. Or you could be saying from a different industry, we shouldn't be providing any increase whatsoever. And so it's in that respect, what I tried to do last budget standpoint is I tried to use, again, what I considered to be an impartial data point, which was unemployment. We know that in February of 2020, the unemployment rate for Kewaunee County was 2.8%. We know that the unemployment rate in September for Kewaunee of 2020 for Kewaunee County was 2.8%. So when, again, we look at a number of those factors as to how to do it, could we then point to a specific business and talk how they were hurting? Absolutely, we can. Could we talk to other ones that they may have been doing very well? Absolutely, we could have been. So again, I try to look at data as much as possible that looks from the broader perspective and as much as possible is an impartial number. Am I going to say that I always get it right? No, I can't say that, but that's kind of where my head and how we try to look at that whole affordability item comes forward.
Okay, any more questions on affordability?
Well, I would like to, for those who weren't around back in 2016, and Scott explained the whole process when we came up with the pay plan. All those numbers are arbitrary. The percentage increases per year, the steps, those are arbitrary. Even the cost of living is arbitrary. But we did our best, and this is what we found out. It really was not too good, because this is our revenue stream projected, the 2016 back here, and this is our expenses. We knew we were going to be running into trouble. So we made the adjustment in the percentages. I don't know what year that was, 18 maybe?
We passed in 18, well, we passed it in 19 and it became active in 20, did it not, I believe?
Yes, passed at 19, effective January 2020.
Then along the way, we made a good course correction by adding in the sales tax. So, but a lot was done to formalize affordability. Paul did most of this work, but in the end, we were able to get trend lines that were in the positive section of the curve. And that's what you have to do constantly. You may not get drastic changes year to year, but I think a decision has to be made around budget time. What can we do for the employees? And I think one of the things that is underemphasized is that the county is providing health insurance. That keeps going up. And we've made a strong effort to keep the quality of health insurance at a high level, the deductibles and co-pays. So you have to advertise that as employee compensation.
Right.
So if we didn't give you 4% this year, we guaranteed the health insurance was going to stay at a high level. And I think the employees believe in that. And they've even told us over the years, if you're going to do anything, keep our health insurance. You may have to do something on the wage end of it and curtail that a little bit, but keep our health insurance. And we're looking at total cost of having an employee and maintaining our employees' longevity. And I think I agree with Scott and Paul that you can't create a formula. If these things happen, therefore we will reduce the wage increase or the COLA by a certain amount. Those are decisions made by the board at budget time on the best information you have at that time. Right now, we can't say what next year's budget would be, what the influences are going to be. Health insurance may go up 4%. I think it went up 2% this time around.
3.
What was it, Paul?
3.
3. And we had gotten by some years with 0 to 1, no increase, which is very lucky to get that. But if it keeps going up 3-4%, that is compensation. Count that as what we're doing for our employees instead of salary. It is a positive influence on the livelihood of each employee.
Any other comments on that issue out there? Otherwise, the next item E, I put on here, and after I put it on there, I thought to myself, well, that's already in the budget. It's just a matter you have to dig it out.
It is, and that's where, again, Mr. Chairman, is, again, from what right now, I'm going to call it the 5-year trend report, but these numbers will start to be part of the process, because to a certain degree, if we just look at one item over another, at times that could give a misperception as to the total picture. If we look at net new construction being less than 1%, well, from a county standpoint, especially from a levy standpoint, that isn't necessarily good. But in that same respect, if we have other revenues that have increased, well, then that is a positive. And so we have to take these different types of data points and put them into context and not focus on any one specific data point, because there is no one specific data point that answers or gives the full picture. And that's where, again, I hate to say it, it's art more than science. And that's where we as administration try to provide those recommendations to you, and why we believe a certain compensation increase is affordable as opposed to another one. And if we don't, then, and we believe something needs to be done, then we would bring forward that we believe things need to be done and provide certain options or recommendations for the executive committee and or the board to take.
The other thing that would be helpful, I think, and it would, when you do your budget narrative, you always talk about, various things that affect the budget. One thing that might be helpful is if you could include in there, if we stay with the step plan and the way things are right now, just a note on, okay, employing the steps and the cost of living, the amount is X. If you did steps but no cost, the amount is Y. And if you did cost of living but no steps, you'd have three different numbers.
Overall cost.
So you'd know what the numbers are, and that would give the board, I think, an idea of what to look at versus, trying to dig everything out of the budget. But
well, and maybe what we could also do, and again, I'd have to look at how we could do this. And so the reason why I'm a little tentative, because let's be honest, the gentleman to my left, the finance director, would be putting together a lot of these numbers, is this might then be something that's another page that's put into the budget, which provides some 5-year trend comparisons for supervisors to see those differing numbers, whether that is, again, wages and salaries. And what you're just talking about is from year to year. And again, if you're just talking the dollar amount, we aren't necessarily talking about what would be considered the overall employee percentage increase, because when we looked at the overall percentage increase, that could be actually up or could be down depending from year to year. But we can try to put something together, Mr. Chair.
But this document that you handed out today with
Right.
the averages, this is interesting information.
Well, and that's the part that I was talking about. We'd probably try to reformat it and put it in such a way that hopefully it can be easily understood. And therefore, when the county administrator puts forward or submits his budget for consideration by the board, and I say that I believe the county can afford the cost of living plus the steps, then here's the different data that I'm looking at and why I'm recommending that we can afford both cost of living and steps for employees because of the different things that are also in there.
And yes, I can get that information together. So if we're talking step dollars, cost of living dollars compared to what it would be with none, yes, I can do that. How many employees are in the first half, second half, maximum, I can do that for the current year. Yeah, I did that when we were changing the pay plan. So yes, I can. I don't know if I can go back 3 to 5 years and get that information reliably, but certainly going forward, I can.
I just think it's important to have a good comparison of 1 year to the next. And then you'd have some justification as to how you're going to approach overall wages.
And again, that's why I apologize, Mr. Chair, because Paul and I had looked at that, but we didn't necessarily then share it with the board because that was our calculations. It had never been asked for before,
And we
but
didn't, I
we'll
was
give
gonna
it to you
say,
now.
we didn't ask for it either.
Right,
So,
but we'll give it to you now.
And then maybe the changes in the insurance, you know, what's gonna cost the county, you know, for more employee insurance, if that increases there, that we can have a comparison to that.
Yeah,
Well-
again, we know that the percentage increases, we know enrollment changes a little bit, and we can say,
Yeah.
okay, here's a percentage increase, 3%. Here's what it is in dollars.
Thank you.
okay, any other issues that you wanna, that we think we should cover, or have we exhausted the? Doak, I see you thinking there. No, he was
No,
thinking.
I mean, I hear us moving toward just keeping the status quo. And the question I have is, it felt like it wasn't done with objective measures last August. I remember a comment, people are hurting, and for that reason, we shouldn't. I guess the question is, moving forward, would there be objective measures used, or would it just be how the supervisors feel on the day they're discussing the proposed increase? And I guess I would direct that to Chairman Olson, because you're leading that effort.
Sure, good question. And the answer is that that's up to the board.
What's up to the executive
I mean,
committee?
that's, well, the executive committee, but ultimately it's up to the
board.
full board. And there, you know, you talk about objective measures, those objective measures are included. But I think that the situation that we dealt with last August, when we had, and we at that point had small businesses, a lot of small businesses in the county that had been shut down for an extended period of time due to the governor's goofy order. And we had some of those businesses not make it. I think that's an objective measure. I think there's also a subjective side to it as well, but I think that's an objective measure. We know that there were businesses that were shut down for an extended period of time in this county. And then to go to those people and say, hey, we're going to give this kind of a percent of increase to everybody, county workers, when you haven't been allowed to work, you haven't been allowed to have your businesses open. I think that's certainly, there's objective aspects to that. Yes, there's a subjective measure as well, but ultimately the decision is made by the county supervisors. And I think that the problem gets to be that when you have a situation like we had this past year, and there's this impression that, hey, this thing is the Magna Carta, this somehow is just the board is required to do this, no matter what the circumstance. I think that's kind of where we get into trouble. And I think also the flip side is that there's an expectation that this is a guarantee. This was guaranteed to me at some point. None of those things were true, but I think that they were believed. And I think going forward, I think that the board has to be more diligent. I think the supervisors have to be more diligent in weighing all aspects of this. I think most years, the plan is probably fairly good. And I think most years, I think that would probably be followed. But I also think that every year, the board, the supervisors have to evaluate, how is this plan working out? What is the historical? I mean, as Bob pointed out, they did this at one point. It was looked at and, oh my gosh, this is way off. We have to adjust this. And I think that the board can't just take for granted, well, hey, we have this in place and there's no need to think about it. I think that the board, and I don't think that the board either, can just accept, well, okay, this is what the finance director and the administrator have told us is affordable. The board members are elected to do a job. They need to do it. So that would be my encouragement to the board each year. Yes, you want to be fair to people, but we also need to be fair to the taxpayers. Answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if I agree with your assessment of what an objective measure is.
Well, an objective, well, I mean, you can call that objective or subjective, but I think it's both. When you look at the fact that you have a large number of small businesses that are closed for an extended period of time. And, I think there's an objective aspect to that. There's also a subjective aspect that those people, have had their businesses closed and aren't able to be able to operate. There's a subjective aspect as well. But I also think that to divorce that subjective aspect of it, to divorce that from what the board does, I think would be inappropriate.
But that also ignores the businesses who are doing well.
Well, which businesses were doing well?
Construction.
Well, okay, construction was.
But I mean, there were businesses doing well as well. I mean, if you look at our budget, we did well.
Construction was operating in the same manner as it had been. I don't know if it was doing any better, but certainly we had a large number of small businesses that were shut down.
No disagreement there.
And I think it was entirely appropriate of the board to be sensitive to that.
So going forward, is what we're here for.
Yes. And I think that well, I'll let the chairman speak to what he thinks going forward.
Well, I think one is that I think we can all agree that the current pay plan as we have it outlined now is something that we can live with. It's useful tool, a guide.
There you go.
As the administrator and our finance director showed us how the cost of living number is determined for at least Wisconsin, we may agree with that, we may not, but I think how do you get a different number? I don't know how you get one. So if you plug those two things in,
It's a useful tool.
Another useful tool, yes. So if you plug those things in, and then if we could, as we use these numbers to come up with a budget and what we're going to be paying people, if the executive committee and the board could have those numbers, okay, this is what the total compensation is for if you employ the step plan and the cost of living. This is what it would be if you just did the steps. And this is what it would be if you just did the cost of living. And then the board as a whole makes a determination on the final number. But we have to use this as a guide somewhere. So I don't know what else we can change, basically. Any other comments?
I think that that this committee, before it disbands, which I hope will happen in not more than one more meeting, should put together a summary of what its, guidance to the board, the full board going forward would be. And I think, some of those things that you just said, I think would be useful. I think that would be, giving the guidance to the board that, hey, we've reviewed the plan. It's a useful tool. We've reviewed the COLA. It's a useful tool. These are all guides. And the board each year, the recommendation is that annually the board reviews these things before making a determination.
I think you've just saved us an extra meeting, Mr. Board Chairman.
So that's recorded? You got that? We can.
I think those comments, between, if you want to be involved, between Scott, Paul, you and I, we could sit down and
Perfect.
Put something together and present it to the executive committee and say, here's where we are.
Next executive committee.
Because I don't think we need to sit here for another meeting and hash over the same stuff.
Please no. But if this committee is amenable to that, then we'll just put those things down into a summary, present it to executive committee and full board, and there's no need. It's just a summary.
Is there a motion needed for that?
There is not. You can just direct.
But if
I concur.
I just have one question, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, Chair. And I'm wanting just to get some clarification only in the respect that I'll be honest, I was a little concerned isn't the right word, but it gave me pause that when you were talking about what the finance director and administration then provides to the board, I'm not sure, and I may have misinterpreted, so I was wanting clarification in that when administration and finance come forward with their recommendations regarding salaries and wages and the like, how I had first interpreted it, and that's why I'm wanting some clarification, is that, yes, the board should review it, but the impression that I was getting is that it should be viewed with a certain level of skepticism. And I guess I have a concern regarding that, because as employees that are specifically hired to assist the board in making their determinations, I have some real concern if you believe that the information that we give you is somehow being purposely skewed or biased, and therefore should be viewed with skepticism.
I don't believe that the information is deliberately skewed or biased. I think it may be interpreted differently, as it certainly was this last year. I think that there may be different perspectives. And so I think that, again, I think the information, I don't disagree that the information is accurate. It's just the interpretation of it and the view of it may well be different, as it was this year.
Thank you.
I don't know if I implied any of that, but I don't think I did, but
Well,
if I did, I apologize. but-
I didn't mean to imply that I think we're getting inaccurate information or skewed information. I don't believe that at all. I do think that there are different opinions, though, of what is affordable, what is appropriate, and certainly my definition of what is generous seems to differ frequently from the general from a lot of people, and that's okay. But ultimately, the full board is going to have to make the decision as to of how that information is interpreted. I think the information we received is all accurate. I think it's very helpful, very useful. I think it's very honest, but I do think that there is a difference of opinion in how it's understood.
And absolutely, that's the authority. The part that was of major concern for me is that as the administrator and finance director and others, if the feeling is that we are not giving you accurate information or that it's skewed, then we're not doing our jobs. And two, what it really then would come down to is that a level of trust has been broken, or a level of confidence has been broken, in the respect that you'll receive the information, but supervisors aren't necessarily going to believe the information that they're given. And I understand from the interpretation standpoint. I'm just more worried from the basic a belief that the information that we're giving you is accurate information, because if that's not the case, then that level of faith and trust is totally broken, which means that we have big issues.
I think we're dealing with, as Supervisor Baker pointed out, objective measure versus subjective measure. And I do think that the objective and subjective, I do believe that they both play in. I think most supervisors would agree with me on that. I don't think it's a purely objective thing. There are objective tools that are useful. They're helpful, but there are also subjective elements that I do think should be considered.
Thank you.
So does anyone think we need to have another meeting? Is everyone okay with the board chair, myself, Scott, and Paul putting together a recommendation from this committee to the executive committee and then moving forward based on that?
The only other thing that I will do, Mr. Chair, because we have 3 members of this subcommittee that are not part of the executive committee, that when we do draft that and send that as recommendations to the executive committee, I will be sending, with, of course, your approval, I will be sending that also to Supervisors Baker and Volenweider, as well as Mr. Widener. So that way everyone as part of the subcommittee does have a copy of what was put together and going to be recommended to the executive committee.
And then the other thing is that once we decide when to put this on the executive committee agenda, I would certainly offer an open invitation to Jeff Doak and Bob to show up at that meeting in case there's any more fierce discussion on this issue. Okay. With that being said, I guess we can.
Move to adjourn.
Do we have to abandon this committee officially or adjourn, sin die, or whatever that? term
I
is?
think what you could do, Mr. Chairman, is you don't have to disband a committee. It's just, and I'm going to assume that what had happened, because this is a ad hoc committee, that usually what happens is ad hoc committees die a silent death by December 31st. And so therefore, if we do meet, then fine. But if we don't meet, then it goes out into the sunset.
Can I make a motion to adjourn with no future meeting date?
Yes, you can.
I make that motion.
So moved. Second by Doak. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. We are adjourned.
11:09.
Thank you, everyone, for participating. It was interesting.
Well, there's always different words you could use.
Let's not do it today, but in the next week or two, let's communicate.